Hey, well, good morning, Catalina Foothills Church. Pastor John Stone here. It's our office actually closed today, so forgive my casual post 4th of July federal holiday 5th of July celebration. But we're here in the office, and we're in Acts for our devotion, and we're in Acts 28. And so Paul, if you remember, is on his way to Rome, and he had a shipwreck, and he had to keep everybody on board because God had promised to deliver them if he kept everybody. And some of them tried to sail away, and he cut the boat. But they all made it safely to shore. And it says this: once safely on shore, this is chapter 28, verse 1, we found out the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood and, as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. For though he escaped the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire, and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their mind and said he was a god. Well, what a wonderful text, and we'll be a couple weeks here in 28, but what's interesting about this is that we sort of get we sort of get to peek into the way people who are not founded in truth think. So on the one hand, these people who are shipwrecked, the people who they're shipwrecked with, the islanders, when they see Paul having escaped and all these people having escaped, they think that their God has favored them. But then when the snake bites him, they immediately say this: when the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." It's interesting how suddenly they change, right? They don't really have any way to think about humanity. So they have these imaginary gods. And then, but what's interesting, but Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people are watching. You can see that they expected him to swell up and suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happened, they changed their minds and said he was a god. Now, there's a kind of insanity in this that you and I are living in, and Christians can fall subject to this with people. But what's interesting is the Bible gives us this great perspective on humanity, that we're made in God's image. There is no greater image. We're made in his image, and yet we're fallen. So we can understand that we were fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image, and yet as fallen, sinful beings, there's evil and darkness in us. And that gives us a real sort of way to deal with people. We don't have to fear people, but we should respect them. We don't have to fear them because we know that we're all sinful, but we can respect them because they're made in God's image. And therefore we don't have to worship them, or we don't have to dismiss them, because they want to say, on the one hand, when a snake bites you, well, you must be a murderer. It's a severe accusation. But then there's no harm done by the snake. You must be a god. And do you see the way our culture tries to do this to people? They either try to say people are a god, and we must listen to everything they say as a human being, and we must even worship them, or they say, "You're nothing. We should cancel you, worthless." It really is a biblical worldview that lets us be sober. It lets us say, no, we're created people. We're creatures of the King. But he made us in his image, but we're broken and sinful. We're not all murderers because snakes bite us, and you don't need to counsel us because of that. But also, we're not gods because some things we're right about. No, we're just God's children. And this biblical worldview keeps us from the insanity of paganism, that at one moment says a snake biting you means you're a murderer, but 10 minutes later, when you don't fall dead or swell up, you're a god. No, we recognize that we're just people like Paul, loved by God in the gospel, made in his image and fallen. And that gives us the ability to be sane, not only with ourselves, but with others. Friends, are you worshiping somebody too much? Are you giving too much weight to somebody because you don't remember they're just a human sinner? Or are you dismissing someone because they made a small mistake? Let the image of God and our sinful nature balance your thinking. We're not murderers or gods. We're just human beings who long for redemption in the person of Jesus. I hope you have a great day. Look forward to seeing you. You have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.